She had been captured during the screaming chaos of the evacuation, pulled from the smoke-choked hallways of her shelter and thrust into the cold metal grasp of towering hands. For hours, maybe days' time, had blurred into a haze of dim corridors, strange humming machinery, and the silent, oppressive presence of the one who carried her. She had seen no one else from her brood, no familiar scent, no warm flicker of family mind-link, just the alien, the human whose massive silhouette moved like a shadow given flesh. Her kind had spoken of them in whispers, half myth, half nightmare. Flesh made dense and strong by a world that crushed lesser bones, eyes forward and unblinking, set deep under a heavy brow. When they breathed, the sound was like slow storms rolling over mountains, and everyone knew they could kill you in a single, careless motion. The cell they had placed her in was nothing like the containment chambers of her own species. No transparent shielding or padded walls, just dark metal, riveted and humming with faint energy currents. She sat in the farthest corner, her small body curled tight. Fine antennae folded against her skull to avoid catching the subtle crackle in the air. Hunger gnawed at her belly, thirst clawed at her throat, and the only sound was the deep, steady rhythm of the humans breathing from somewhere beyond the dimly lit doorway. When the light changed, she thought at first it was a trick of shifting, red emergency luminescence fading into something paler. But then she heard the mechanical groan of a hatch, the creak of boots on deck plating. The human stepped inside. No armor now, no helmet, just that strange pale brown face framed by messy dark hair, eyes reflecting the faint light like deep water. She shrank back instantly, her pulse surging until she could feel it in her fragile fingertips. In the stories, this was the moment the human would assess you, measure you against some unknowable standard, and then end you. Quickly, brutally, without hesitation. But the human did not raise a weapon. He didn't even move closer at first. He crouched, lowering himself in a slow, deliberate motion until his head was level with hers. The space between them felt enormous. Despite the smallness of the cell, she could smell him now, warm, strange, not unpleasant, but utterly alien. He reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew something, a flat container made of clear material, filled with shimmering liquid, that caught the light like molten crystal. Slowly, he set it on the floor and nudged it toward her. She stared at it, uncomprehending, certain there must be some trick, poison, a trap, to see if she would approach. Her kind's predators sometimes did this in the deep, wild bait before the kill. She did not move. The human said nothing, but his eyes flicked toward the container, then back to her. And for a heartbeat she felt something she could not name, a strange invitation. When she did not take it, he sighed. Softly, picked up the container again, and with deliberate slowness, tilted it toward his own mouth. He drank not all, just enough to show the liquid was safe, then slid it toward her again. Her throat ached with thirst. Her limbs trembled from the effort of resisting. Finally, unable to endure the dryness any longer, she darted forward, snatched the container, and scuttled back to her corner. The liquid was cool, clean, impossibly pure. It tasted of nothing and everything, like life itself. She drank until it was empty. When she lowered it, the human was still watching her. His expression was unreadable, but something had changed in the air between them. She had expected death. What she had received instead was water somewhere deep inside. A fragile and dangerous thing began to stir a question, an idea her ancestors would have warned her never to entertain. What if the stories were wrong? The next cycle passed in a blur of drifting thoughts and restless half-sleep, her mind gnawing at what had happened. She had not died. She had not even been struck. Instead, the human had given her water. It made no sense. Her species' oldest survival lesson was simple: when in the presence of a predator, expect teeth, expect violence, expect nothing but the ending of things. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she kept seeing the moment he drank first, as if he needed to prove something. Why? The hum of the ship was constant, a deep vibration that shivered through the walls. The air was warmer here than she liked, dry and heavy with the faint metallic taste of recycled atmosphere. Her stomach ached, no, not from fear, though that was still there, but from hunger. She had not eaten since before the capture, and her small body, designed for rapid energy cycles, was beginning to protest in ways she could not ignore. Her kind could go longer without food, yes, but each moment stretched the ache further, and it was breaking her ability to think clearly. When the door slid open again, her pulse spiked, but this time she forced herself to stay still instead of retreating to the farthest corner. The human entered carrying something wrapped in soft fabric, and her senses snapped toward the faint, rich scent that leaked from it, warm, yeasty, unlike anything in her homeworld's diet, but maddeningly pleasant. He crouched again, setting the bundle down between them. The smell intensified, and she realized there was something inside that fabric, some kind of food. He unfolded the cloth to reveal a round, slightly flattened shape, its surface golden brown, marked with darker spots. Bread, she knew the word, from scattered data pulse images that had passed through her kind's hidden networks. Human food, dense with starch and warmth. But bread meant something else too in human lore. Peace offerings, shared meals, beginnings of trust. She had never believed that part. The human didn't hand it to her. Instead, he produced a small cutting tooler, thin, gleaming edge, and sliced a piece away. She flinched at the sight of the blade. Sharp edges meant death in her world. The human noticed. He slowed his movements even further, setting the knife on the ground beside him, away from her, then taking the slice and eating it himself, chewing, swallowing, showing again that it was safe. Only then did he cut another piece, smaller, and place it on the floor, sliding it gently toward her. She hesitated. The blade still lay in sight, and her instincts screamed at her to retreat. But the hunger was stronger now, and the scent of the bread was like a hand pulling her forward. She crept toward it, her eyes never leaving his hands. No sudden moves, no lunges. She reached for the bread, the warmth of it surprising against her fingers, and withdrew with it into her corner. The texture was strange, dense, but soft, slightly elastic. The first bite was overwhelming. She had no frame for this. Flavor-rich, earthy, slightly sweet. It dissolved slowly, releasing more taste than she thought possible from something so plain. She ate in tiny bites, half expecting the human to take it back. But he didn't move except to cut another slice for himself. When she finished, he gathered the fabric and the knife, stood, and left without a word. The door sealed behind him, leaving her in silence again. But it wasn't the same silence. The ache in her stomach had lessened. The dry rasp in her throat was gone. And in the space they left behind, a dangerous thought grew sharper, louder. He had a weapon. He had a clear chance to strike, and he hadn't. That made him unpredictable, and unpredictability, in her world, was more frightening than cruelty. The hours, or maybe whole, planetary cycles blurred together in the metallic womb of the cell. She had no sun, no stars, no rhythm of night or day, only the endless hum of the ship and the pulse of her own thoughts. Hunger and thirst were no longer immediate tyrants. The human had returned twice, each time with something to drink and something to eat, always demonstrating its safety before leaving her alone again. The bread was replaced once with a block of compressed rations that smelled faintly of spice and mineral. Another time with a strange fruit, soft-skinned and filled with bright, sharp sweetness. Every time he moved the same way, slow, deliberate, showing his hands, placing the food within reach and withdrawing. No sudden lunges, no direct touch. It should have eased her fear. It didn't. If anything, it deepened it. Because she could not place his actions within the framework of anything she understood. Predators took what they wanted. Conquerors broke their captives quickly to establish dominance. Yet here she was, alive, fed, unstruck. The logic of it was wrong. It left a gap in her mind where the answer should be, and her mind filled that gap with uneasy possibilities. She tested the limits of her cell more often now. The walls were solid, cold under her fingertips, the seams too narrow for even her smallest claw to slip into. The faint hum of energy in the air told her there was more than just metal keeping her inside. An unseen field crackled faintly when she pressed her antennae near the door. She paced sometimes, short nervous circuits that left faint trails in the thin layer of dust along the floor's edges. Her kind were not meant for such confined spaces. Her body longed for open air, for the feel of shifting ground under her feet, but there was nowhere to go. And always, her thoughts circled back to the human. What did he want? Was she an experiment, a bargaining chip, a curiosity? If he had taken others from her shelter, they had not been brought here, or else they were hidden somewhere in the ship's vast, unseen interior. Once or twice she thought she heard faint noises through the wall's distant voices. Mechanical clanks, but they were too indistinct to be sure. The third time he came after the bread and the fruit. He brought something that made her retreat instinctively. It was not food or water this time, but a small bundle of fabric, folded tight. He set it down on the floor and stepped back. She didn't move, not at first, because fabric in the hands of her kind was often used for binding. But his posture was different, looser, less guarded, as if he did not expect her to rush or resist. When she finally crept forward and touched it, the fabric was soft, warmer than the air. She unfolded it slowly to reveal a small garment sized for her. It was made of a thick, layered material, clearly designed for insulation. Her own clothes had been thin, worn, stained with ash from the evacuation, and the warmth of the new garment seeped into her chilled fingers as she held it. Why would he give her clothing? Was it a sign she was to be taken somewhere colder, or simply protection? The thought was dangerous. Protection implied care. Care implied something other than ownership or control, and she could not afford to believe that yet. When she looked back up, he was watching her again, not with the flat, assessing gaze of a predator, but with something else, something unreadable that made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't understand. He made a small gesture, touching the front of his own shirt, then pointing toward her, an invitation to wear it. She hesitated, then slid her arms into the garment. It was far too big, but the fabric's folds wrapped around her small frame, trapping the heat against her skin. She had not realized how cold she had been until that moment. He gave a single short nod, almost like acknowledgement, then left. That night tore what she assumed was night. She lay curled inside the warmth of the new garment, her mind more tangled than ever. Predators didn't keep their prey warm. Conquerors didn't give comfort. So what was he? And why did part of her, against every instinct, want to find out? Sleep came in fragments, in trembling stretches where her mind floated half-aware, ready to snap awake at the slightest noise. It wasn't just fear that kept her in that limbo. It was the uncertainty of when the human would return. His visits were irregular. Sometimes many hours passed between them. Sometimes he came twice in the span of what felt like a single rotation. She could not predict the rhythm, and that unpredictability clung to her like a film she could not shed. The ship's sounds became her clock. The deep, steady hum of the engines was constant, but sometimes other noises joined it, distant clangs, the faint echo of heavy boots, occasional bursts of static-laced announcements in a language she didn't know. She had begun to recognize a few recurring patterns, a deep triple clang that seemed to signal docking or undocking, a faint rising tone followed by silence that might be some kind of system reset. Each sound hinted at a world beyond her cell, but the barrier between her and that world was absolute until the scratching started. It was faint at first, so faint she thought it might be the murmur of her own nerves. But then it came again, soft and irregular, from somewhere behind the wall opposite the door. Not mechanical, not a vibration from the ship's systems. It was organic, the kind of sound made by small claws or nails against metal. She froze, antennae tilting toward it. The scratching paused, then returned, 3 quick strokes, a pause to slower ones. Her mind leapt to possibilities. Another prisoner, an animal, a warning. She tapped the wall lightly in response, the way her kind used to signal through cavern stone during hunts. 1 tap, then 2. The scratching stopped entirely. She waited, every muscle tense, but no answer came. Minutes or hours passed before she dared to relax again. But something had shifted in her chest. There might be others. That meant the human's focus on her could be part of something larger, an experiment, a selection process, a cruel test. The idea made her stomach twist. The next time the door opened, she scanned the human's face for any sign he'd heard. The scratching too, but as always, his expression gave nothing away. This time, he brought something different again, a small, flat object that glimmered faintly in the dim light. It was rectangular, smooth on one side, textured on the other. When he crouched and set it down, she realized it was a thin slate of some kind, covered in faintly glowing lines. He tapped the surface, and the lines shifted, symbols appearing in a neat row. She recognized none of them, but his gaze flicked between the slate and her, expectant. A test, then, a teaching, or was he trying to make her reveal something about herself? Her people guarded their written forms as fiercely as their genetic. Line writing was identity, heritage, and vulnerability, but these marks were his, not hers. He tapped again, and one of the symbols dissolved into a new shape. Then he pointed at himself. His mouth moved slowly, forming a sound she could not mimic with her own voice. But the meaning was clear enough. This was his designation, his name. He tapped another blank space and then pointed at her. Her first instinct was to refuse, to curl inward and keep herself hidden. But then she thought of the scratching, of the possibility that others were here and silent, and of the fact that she had no control over what was learned about her anyway. Slowly, she traced the sign her brood used to mark her identity, simple, angular, impossible to translate directly into his symbols. He watched closely, then reproduced it as best he could in his own script. It was imperfect, but close enough. Something loosened in his posture, almost like satisfaction. He nodded once and left with the slate. That night, the scratching returned. This time, it came in deliberate bursts, and this time, she was certain there was someone else out there, but she didn't know yet if they were friend, foe, or something far worse. The scratching came again, sharper this time, with pauses that felt purposeful rather than random. She pressed her antennae close to the cold wall, trying to filter the sound from the low vibration of the ship's systems. 3 strokes, pause. 4 strokes, pause. 2 short scrapes, then 1 long. It wasn't her people's tapping code, but it had pattern, and patterns meant intent. Her kind knew many communication forms, some older than written language: stone taps, claw etchings, even the pulse flickers of certain cave insects. But this was different. She tried replying with slow taps of her own claws, mirroring the rhythm exactly. The response came quickly, a variation of the first sequence, repeated twice. A conversation had begun, though neither of them had words. They continued for what might have been hours, trading short bursts of noise across the barrier. The meaning wasn't clear yet, but there was an exchange, a back-and-forth flow that built a strange, fragile connection. It wasn't until a particularly loud scrape that she realized her own heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the shock of not being alone. When the door slid open again, she nearly jumped. The human stepped inside, carrying 2 objects, another bundle of food and the glowing slate from before. His gaze swept the cell as if measuring something unseen. She tried to still her breathing, afraid he might have heard the scratching too. If he had, he didn't show it. He set the bundle down first, unwrapping a small, steaming object that smelled faintly of herbs and roasted protein. Then he placed the slate between them and tapped it twice. Symbols appeared. The exercise was different today. He would tap 1 symbol, then point at something in the cell or on his person. When he tapped a curve-shaped mark, he touched his chest, his self. When he tapped a sharper mark, he gestured toward her. A looping shape came with a gesture toward the food, and she realized he was naming things, naming them both. It was risky to give him her language, but he didn't seem to expect her words yet. He was teaching his. Each time she imitated his sounds, his mouth curved in a way she was beginning to recognize as approval. It was unsettling. Predators weren't supposed to show pleasure at such small exchanges. Yet each approving look felt solid, like a beam across a collapsing floor. When he left, she ignored the food for a long while, her thoughts tangled. The scratching came again later, urgent now. 3 bursts, pause, 4 bursts. She replied cautiously. This time, the response was slower, the sound dragging as though the one making it was tired or injured. A faint, muffled tone followed, too dull to make out clearly, but enough for her to know the source wasn't an animal. It was someone trapped like her. The tapping grew weaker. She pressed her hands flat against the wall, willing them to continue. But no more came. That was when the first thought struck her like a blow. If there were others here, the human might not be treating them the same way, and she had no idea why. She was being kept alive when someone else might not be. The scratching did not return for 2 cycles. The silence gnawed at her worse than the hunger ever had. She found herself leaning against the cold wall, antennae straining for even the faintest sign of movement beyond it. But there was nothing, just the ship's endless hum and her own. restless pulse. The human came twice during that absence, always with food, water, and sometimes the glowing slate. He continued the naming ritual, repeating certain symbols until she could mimic them more easily. She wanted to ask more, but heavy bootsteps echoed down the corridor outside her cell. The sound was heavier than the human's, accompanied by a deeper vibration in the plating. Whoever it was stopped outside her door. Her body locked rigid, the panel hissed open, and the human entered. No bundle of food this time, no slate, just him, and in his hands a small metal case. His gaze swept over her quickly, assessing, then shifted to the far wall where the knocking had come. From, her breath caught, did he know? If he did, he said nothing. Instead, he placed the metal case on the floor, pressed a latch, and opened it. Inside were small medical tools, sterile wraps, sealant gel, and something that looked like a handheld scanner. He tapped the scanner against his own arm, showing it was harmless, then gestured toward her. She hesitated, then crept forward. When the device passed over her, it emitted a faint chime. He studied its display for a moment, his brow furrowing. Then he reached into the case for one of the wraps. She realized then that the edge of her lower arm, scarred from shrapnel during the evacuation, was bleeding again. She hadn't even noticed. He clinged it with surprising care, sealing the wound and wrapping it neatly, and then, without a word, he closed the case and left. The moment the door sealed, the knocking returned faster now, urgent. She pressed her claws to the wall, the warmth of the wrap still lingering on her arm. She tapped a single word into the metal dot. Why? The reply came slowly, but it was only one word. Human. She stared at the wall, as if the letters could pass through solid metal. Human. It was not just a name, it was an explanation, an accusation, a warning, all in one. In her language, the word carried weight, its meaning layered with centuries of fear and whispered stories. Humans were apexes, not just predators, not just conquerors, apexes of everything. They could live in extremes that killed others, endure wounds that would cripple most, and turn whatever they touched into weapons or tools as needed. Her people's elders had said humans were a paradox, the most dangerous species, but also capable of something stranger, something the elders refused to name. She'd thought it was superstition. Now she wasn't sure. She tapped back against the wall. You, the answer came slowly. No. Then another word, taken, followed by hurt, tightened. Whoever was behind the wall wasn't just a prisoner, they were a prisoner of humans, and hurt enough to make those scratches falter before. The idea made her antennae twitch involuntarily. It didn't fit the human she had seen, the one who gave food, water, warmth, even treated her wound. Could there be more than one kind? Or was hers the rare treatment while others suffered? She wanted to ask more, but the door hissed open again. The human entered carrying the slate, this time with a second, smaller object clipped to its side, a stylus. He crouched, placing it between them, and tapped the screen. Instead of symbols, an image appeared, rough, blocky shapes forming a starship, the kind used for planetary raids. He pointed at the image, then at her. She understood instantly. He was asking if this was her ship. She shook her head. He swiped the screen, showing another vessel's leak, with curved edges like flowing water. She nodded. That was the civilian transport she'd been on before the attack. He nodded back, entered more symbols, and showed her another imager, vast field of wreckage drifting in space. Fire-blackened hulls, shards of plating, and the faint glimmer of a broken transport core. He tapped the image, then pointed at her again. Her throat tightened. Was he telling her that her ship was gone? That there were no survivors but her? She didn't want to believe it. When he saw her hesitate, his gaze softened slightly. He turned the slate toward himself, drew to simple shapes a small figure, and then a second one. Then he drew a circle around both and tapped it twice. Together the gesture was impossible. Was he saying she wasn't alone? That he intended to keep her safe? That couldn't be right. He closed the slate and left without another word. The scratching returned soon after. She tapped furiously against the wall. What human? The reply came after a long pause. Not yours. She froze. The implication settled in like cold in her bones. There was more than one human on this ship, and if what the voice behind the wall had said was true, hers might be the only one who hadn't hurt them. She didn't sleep after that. The scratching stopped, but the word "not yours" kept circling in her mind like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. She had always assumed there was only one human on the ship, her human, and that the rest of the vessel was run by machines or some alien crew she hadn't seen. The possibility of a second human unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. When the door opened next, it was different. It wasn't the soft hiss of routine visits. The hatch slammed open with a metallic clang, the vibration shivering through the floor. Two figures filled the doorway. The first was her human familiar shape, familiar steady gaze. The second was taller, broader, clad in segmented armor painted with jagged stripes. The helmet's visor was a dark mirrored sheen, but even without seeing the face, she could feel the difference. The first human entered rooms like one stepping into still water. This one forced the space to bend around them. The armored human's movements were sharp, impatient. A gloved hand pointed toward her, then gestured to the side with a jerk. A command. Her human stepped slightly in front of them, one hand raised not aggressively, but enough to block the view of her. The exchange that followed was in their language, rapide, low, but edged with steel. The armored one's voice was clipped, machine-like, through the helmet's filter. Hers replied slowly, evenly. There was no physical clash, but the air felt taut, as if one wrong word would snap it. Then the armored one moved forward anyway. She shrank back instinctively, antennae flattening, but her human shifted subtly, placing himself between them. Another sharp exchange. This time the armored one's tone rose, distorted by the helmet into something almost like a growl. And then, without warning, the armored human turned and left, the sound of their boots pounding the deck until the corridor fell silent. Her human lingered only a moment longer. He glanced back at her, not the calm look he usually gave, but something colder, more urgent, before closing the hatch and locking it. She stood frozen for a long time, her pulse racing. Later, the scratching returned. This time it was frantic, the scrapes coming in uneven bursts. She pressed her ear to the wall. That one kills. The words chilled her more than the cold metal ever could. She tapped back quickly. Mine stopped him. A pause. Then yours is different. The phrase carried weight. Her kind used those words only when marking something dangerous, but worth keeping close. A rare tool, a rare ally, or something whose motives were unknown but might yet align with survival. For the first time, she realized she had stopped thinking of him as just a human. He was hers, and that, she knew, was dangerous too. The armored human's visit didn't fade from her thoughts. It replayed over and over his abrupt command, the sharp exchange, the blocking stance her human had taken. The quiet between them had been a shield, but she didn't know if it could hold forever. Her cell had always felt like a cage. Now it felt like a countdown. When her human returned on the next cycle, he brought no food, no slate, just himself. And in his hand, a small object she had never seen before, thin, hexagonal disc with a faint shimmer in its center. He crouched, placed it on the floor, and slid it toward her. She hesitated, then reached out. The disc was light, almost too light for its size, and when she tilted it, the shimmer deepened, as though liquid light swirled inside. She looked back at him, questioning. He gestured toward the far wall, then toward the door, and made a motion of two fingers walking. The meaning struck her like a spark. Map. She tapped the disk's surface. The light inside unfolded into a ghostly projection, thin lines forming corridors, bulkheads, and chambers. The layout was unfamiliar, but clearly the ship. She found her cell in the projection's corner, and beyond it, a cluster of other marked spaces. One of those had to be where the scratching voice came from. When she looked up, he was watching her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something in his eyes' hesitation. He reached over, tapped the map, and pointed to a section near the center of the ship, marked with a faint red glow. Then he pointed at her, then at himself, and finally to that glowing section. Together, the gesture said. Before she could respond, the sound of heavy boots echoed again from the corridor outside. His expression hardened instantly. He snatched the disc from her hands, shut it down, and slipped it into his pocket before the hatch could open. It was not the armored one this time, but to smaller figures, humanoid but not human. They had pale, translucent skin stretched over, thin, elongated limbs, and their wide eyes flickered with an unnatural blue glow. Crew, guards. They stepped inside, scanning the cell with their glowing gaze. Her human stood still, letting them pass their inspection without interference. The taller one spoke in a series of clicks and hisses before gesturing toward the wall where the scratching voice lived. The shorter one nodded, producing a device that pulsed faint light against the metal. Her gut tightened. Were they searching for the other prisoner? The humans and these creatures exchanged no words, but there was an understanding. In the way they moved, efficient, practiced. When they left, her human shoulders eased just slightly. He looked at her once, and though no sound passed between them, she understood the message in his eyes. Not safe yet. That cycle, the scratching didn't come at all. She sat with her back to the wall, heart racing, wondering if she would ever hear it again. The silence where the scratching used to be was worse than the sound itself. It pressed in, thick and suffocating, making every second in the cell feel heavier. She had begun to think the other prisoner was gone, moved, silenced. Or worse, when the faintest tremor rippled through the floor beneath her. It wasn't scratching, it was tapping. Slow, deliberate taps, spaced just enough to be intentional. She froze, straining to hear past the hum of the ship's systems. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, another pause. The pattern repeated, and though she didn't know the meaning, her instincts told her it was a message someone trying to get through without being noticed. Her pulse quickened. She tapped back just once, softly. The answering pause was short this time, almost relieved. The sequence that followed was more complex. She didn't understand the language, but the rhythm seemed to carry urgency. She tried to mimic the patterns. hoping she wasn't answering with nonsense. The exchange lasted only a few minutes before a sudden heavy vibration shuddered through the walls. She pulled her hand away, the tapping gone. Footsteps approached from the corridor outside. When the hatch opened, it wasn't her human, it was the armored one. He stepped inside, visor gleaming, and scanned the cell. His gaze lingered on her hand, the one she'd been tapping with. Without a word, he turned toward the wall where the tapping had come from and placed his palm against it. Her stomach knotted. If he knew about the communication. But then his posture shifted, relaxed, almost curious. He rapped the wall twice, hard enough to make her flinch, and a faint, metallic echo answered from the other side. The armored one tilted his head, as if considering, before turning sharply and leaving without another word. She sank back against the wall, unsettled. The exchange had been too casual, like he knew more than he was letting on. That cycle passed without her human returning. Anxiety gnawed at her until the lights dimmed to sleep phase. She lay curled, staring at the hatch, when a faint sound made her sit upright, not tapping this time, not scratching. It was a voice barely more than a whisper sliding through a hairline crack in the wall. "They will come for him first," it breathed, the words carrying in a language she almost understood. "If you want him to live, you must move before the red light." She pressed her ear to the wall, but the voice faded, replaced by silence. The map in her memory burned brighter now, and she realized with a chill that the red glow her human had pointed to was not a destination. It was a warning.